Want to take a shower with Mitch? Hey Siri, play Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon.
I couldn't find Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon in your music.
Ugh, she never works. Direct from Montreal, Canada, this is Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon.
Welcome to this episode of Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. Joining me on the phone, it is a Bachman Turner drummer and Delinquent Records president, Marc LaFrance. And some of you are thinking, well, who's Marc LaFrance? Well, Marc is somebody who has sang and played on pretty much every record that you have ever loved or owned, including records by Mötley Crüe, Bon Jovi, Blue Murder, The Cult, David Lee Roth, Scorpions, Black Veil Brides, Alice Cooper, Loverboy, Payolas, Glass Tiger, Chilliwack. Should I go on? Because I could. His credits stretch over 100 albums, and it's all albums that we've loved. In fact, there's a famous photo running around the internet these days where they are in the studio recording Mötley Crüe's Dr. Feelgood album, and Marc is there with Bryan Adams and Jack Blades of Night Ranger, and they are doing backing vocals on a song. So yeah, you know him, you love him. Or you might not know him, but I know you love him. Anyway, without further ado, I give you the one, the only, Marc LaFrance. We are speaking with Bachman Turner Overdrive drummer Marc LaFrance, and of course, some of you might have seen his name on a whole bunch of albums from years ago, from Loverboy to Mötley Crüe to Blue Murder to Little Caesar to Electric Boys, David Lee Roth, nonstop, and of course, a picture of him singing with Vince Neil, Jack Blades, and Bryan Adams has been making the rounds on the wonderful internet. It is bonjour, Marc LaFrance. How are you?
Bonjour. Comment ça va?
Ça va très bien. Now, your story really intrigues me because, listen, I spend a lot of time speaking to frontline artists. If you look at the last episode, I just had Rob Halford on, and I just finished an interview with Frank Hannon of Tesla, and so I've got. But it's your story in particular that interests me because a lot of fans don't know that you have been on pretty much every album that they've ever loved. So, but let's first get caught up with Bachman Turner. Right, let's get caught up with Bachman Turner Overdrive real quick. The band took a break for a few years, came back in 2009.
Yes, correct.
Talk to me about that. Yeah.
That was amazing. I think our first big show was, we did a rehearsal. I remember about a week of rehearsals in Winnipeg. And then our first major show was actually Sweden Rocks, which was absolutely amazing. I don't know if you ever heard of that festival, but it's like one of the premier festivals in Europe. I think they have about 3 different stages or whatever, but the production is unbelievable. We played the night before us, Aerosmith debuted. It was the first time after Steve Tyler, and they had a little bit of it was their first gig back together. And then we warmed up. We were the band just before Guns N' Roses. So it was really exciting time. It was wow. Really, really, really amazing.
Listen, and Sweden Rock is one of the greatest festivals out there. You've got that, you've got Wacken, you've got a few. Well, I'm going to ask you this from a Kiss perspective real quick. With Bachman Turner, do you still do the song Rock and Roll Hell? Do you still perform that song? Because it was obviously eventually covered by Kiss and written by Jim Vallance. Is that one of the songs that still shows up in the set list every so often?
No, I don't. We don't do that. I mean, we do a lot of the, Not Fragile, and which is, to me, is one of my favorite tunes. I mean, when Fred sings that, it's just the guy's just still, there's a lot of singers out especially the older group of singers and stuff. A lot of the guys, because they sang so much, their voices aren't, as quite what they used to be. But this guy, man, it's like every night it's like this refrigerator truck just coming through. It's pretty amazing.
So let me ask you about some of this past, because you look at that, it was written by Jim Vallance and it connected to Kiss, and then it connects it to Bryan Adams. And there seems to have been this period of time in the 80s where everybody or everything was sort of going on in Vancouver. And then, of course, you ended up working on all these different albums. So I'm going to start with talking about these albums.
Sure.
A documentary producer came to me and had this picture of you with Bryan Adams and Jack Blades and Vince Neil and said, listen, I don't know who took this picture, and I want to use it in this documentary. Can you put it on your socials? And then, of course, later on, Nikki Sixx grabbed it from my socials and started putting it on his, uncredited, but that's okay. And then he started repurposing it on his socials. And talk to me a little bit about that. How does Marc LaFrance, a guy out in Vancouver, get in with Little Mountain Studios, Bryan Adams, Jack? How do you end up on these? What's the journey, basically?
It was an amazing. I moved to Vancouver in 1980, and I was for the 4 years before that, I was in a band called Crocus, not to be confused with the Crocus, I believe, from the Netherlands or whatever. I think.
The Swiss band.
It's Swiss band, sorry, but our band was from Winnipeg, and it was CROWCUSS. And ironically, we had two ex-Guess Who members in at the time, Bill Wallace and Greg Lescue. So after doing that band, we had quite some success in Canada, moderate success, mostly out in Western Canada. Did have a #1 single in Guatemala, which was quite funny. But I moved to Vancouver and I started doing sessions. I went around to all the production houses and GGRP, which was one of the production houses there, I got a meeting with Brian Griffith. Next thing you know, boom, I'm singing on piles of sessions, jingles and stuff like that. That's where I met Bryan Adams. At the time, we were doing a lot of session work together. So it was a real camaraderie. And of course, Bob Rock was there working on some of those things and Mike Fraser. So it was like a real close unit of people that worked together all the time. So when projects came up, you'd be sitting doing a Chevy commercial and Bob Rock would walk through the hall and go, "Hey, Mark, I'm doing a band called Blue Murder next week. Can you come in and do background vocals?" Sure. So it was like that. That's kind of how the whole thing sort of started. And it just continued on for quite a few years after that, obviously, because the studio, after that, that Loverboy album, Lovin' Every Minute, or not Lovin' Every Minute, but the first Loverboy album that hit, that's kind of the one that exploded that studio. Because then after that, Bon Jovi, because Fairbairn had produced the first Loverboy album, which went big, and then Bon Jovi, and then all the other ones just followed. So that's, hopefully I've sort of given you a little bit of insight how it kind of fell together.
And it's amazing for me to think that Bryan Adams was in there doing session work, because you don't think of Bryan Adams as a session musician, not in 2019, right?
No, but he was, still, I've seen him. We had a good fortune of doing the Invictus games in Toronto. So it was great because we got to sit around for about a half an hour and reminisce about our past. I hadn't seen him in several years, but it really was quite an amazing thing to regroup. And I went to see him, singing, and the guy still sings so amazingly well live. He's one of the top. There's another guy who sings, just as good as his records, if not better. I agree. So consistent. He's one of the best. Paul Rodgers, another amazing guy. We had good fortune of doing some dates. We did actually cross Canada tour with him, with Bachman Turner, and he's another amazing one.
He is, and I have to say, one of the best performances I've ever heard from Bryan is this past summer in Syracuse. I was backstage with Mickey Curry.
Yeah.
And Bryan was in the room next door with an acoustic guitar, and he pulled it out, and he did a version of the Eurythmics' "Sweet Dreams." Just him and a voice. And so here you are backstage, and Bryan Adams doing "Sweet Dreams." It was, I don't want to say it was haunting. It was just perfect. It was just perfect. And unfortunately, listen, there's no video of it. There's no, anyway, but one of those things, right?
Yeah, it was. It was such a close community. I remember I was doing some demos with another band called Straight Lines, who was signed to CBS Records at the time, and I just joined the band. So I was, we were in the studio, and Adams was doing an album. I can't remember which one, and because there are two studios. There was A and B, or Studio A, Studio B, that were the big rooms at Little Mountain. So he was doing his album on the other side. I think it was Studio A. I always get confused. But he came in with a half-inch tape saying, "Mark, you got to sing. Look, at all you got to do is put the vocal on this. And unfortunately, I don't remember what the song. Well, I didn't ask him what the song was, but at the time, of course, I had just joined the band, so the other guys in the band, I don't think were keen on covering somebody else's tune. But I often think about that day, how it's not every day you have Bryan Adams coming in with the 2-inch recording of a master tape to be able to just slap a vocal on. It's a pretty interesting little tidbit there.
It is, and of course, Jim Valance was also part of that whole thing. But I'm going to ask you this: Little Mountain Studio Little Mountain Sound Studio, to get it correct.
Yes.
Is known for the drum sound, right? We always talk about the drum sound, and you're a drummer. You're obviously drumming with Bachman Turner. What was it about Little Mountain? How was it set up? Why is this drum sound so different than the drum sound at Studio XYZ in San Diego? What was it about Little Mountain and the drum room or the drum whatever?
Well, what it was is that they had the loading bay. And they would feed, they'd use that loading bay to get that ambient sound for the drums. So that was the big catch there. But that was an amazing, that really added to the sound of the drums and stuff like that. But you can't forget the amazing producers that were working in that studio. Bob Rock, Bruce Fairburn, David Foster did several albums there too. I worked on a Paola's album. Actually, it was a Bryan and Adams Valance tune on the Paola's album that David Foster produced. There was so many. It was one of those places that just everything lined up, because you had the talent, the great bands that came in there. You had the producers. You had the facility was state of the art. And Vancouver, the vibe of Vancouver was, it's a pretty amazing city, and all of those things combined, I think, made that place a magical space to record.
It really did. Now, since we're going to start talking about some of the albums you've been on, and that picture that went out on the internet, but in terms of being a background singer who gets called in, is there? And I say this respectfully, but is there a career in that? Is there money in that? Can you make a go at it, or is it just, hey, we need a buddy? Can you be that buddy? Do you know what I mean?
No, it was. There was one of the other singers that I was paired with a lot was Dave Steele, who's an amazing singer. So I have to mention him. Between the two of us, we sort of combined to make this sound, and that really worked really well for doing like gang vocals, because a lot of people think you'd bring your buddies in. And I've been on sessions where I'm not going to mention the name of the act, but it's happened several times where you'd be in the studio and, hey, let's get the road crew in here, and and you get everybody in there, and it just, the next day you're back in with the real singers re-singing it all the time. And part of it was that we were working almost every day. We were doing sessions, not just in Little Mountain, but all over Vancouver. There were several studios. So we were singing almost every day, doing sessions all the time. So we were fast and able to do the job that the producers needed to get the sounds that they needed. And yes, we got paid well. And, now with the neighboring rights regime, we get, paid royalties from all over the world. So it ended up being a plus.
Wow, that's great. And I know what you mean about that. There was a band once that asked me and a couple of the buddies, hey, come sing on the song. We need some background vocals. And they played it back, and you could hear me squawking like an injured chicken. And they just went, yeah, okay, that's not going to work. And I was like, no, it's not. And I'm very critical of my but I've been there and I know what it's like. So, okay. So let's get to this picture, and from the picture we'll lead to other stuff. And we might have to do a part 2 because we've got about half an hour today. So
not a problem.
You're in this picture that's on the internet that I put up there. You're with Jack Blades, Vince Neil. It's the Dr. Feelgood sessions. So how does that? Is that again? So you're part of this sort of local scene, and they say, come on in. So how does Jack Blades end up with Mötley Crüe? Oh, and Steven Tyler was there too. So how does this all sort of come together?
Steven Tyler, Steven Tyler, Aerosmith were recording their album in the other studio. So, everybody's intermingling in between, so you'd go into it was quite the thing because you'd be, I think on that particular album I put in over 50 hours of studio time working. So but you wouldn't be singing all the time. So you'd do one song, the engineer would have to set up for the next song. So you'd be out. They had a nice little lounge. And so you'd be sitting around just chatting with, because Steve Tyler was on a break or whatever. So everybody was it was like a little community. I think Jack Blades was a friend of either Vince or Tommy Lee. I can't remember. They were friends. So there was, he was up visiting and happened to sit in on that particular song. So
now, I was going to say just real quick, you're just primarily doing backing vocals. We're not using you to correct vocals or to enhance or to take away from the lead singer. It's really just extra texture. It's not
what it is. Absolutely. I mean, the big thing people like when you're a singer, professional background singer, you're going in to enhance, to back up the person's there. You're not going there to make your voice. If your voice sticks out too much, you're gone. You got to be. You're there to blend and reinforce whatever singer you're backing up. Because that's what you do. You're trying not to steal the limelight. You're there to blend and to make it work.
Okay.
So that's so it was, yeah. So that's the kind of thing. You're there for support and to just, make sure that the best possible performance and enhance. And like in the choruses, obviously in choruses, you're doing, there's a lot of, different parts that you would sing. You wouldn't just be singing like one vocal part, and it would be, lots of multi-tracking and stuff like that happening, like similar to like what Queen used to do, where Bob Rock just had a magical way of recording the vocals. And, I'd get to produce some stuff now, and believe me, from working with these amazing producers, it's I was sitting there watching these guys work. So it was like being in producing high school or university rather.
Now, when you look at the bands you've worked with, were you friends at the time, or are you friends with the Nikki Sixxes and the Tommy Lees of this world? Or were you the guys that were brought in after the sessions were done to add stuff? I mean, was it?
Oh, they were around. I mean, they were Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee in particular were quite active in being involved in making sure, being a part of what we were singing and stuff like that, for sure. They're pretty, a lot of the artists are like hands-on, different situations. Some of the artists that you do background vocals with a little bit less than others, but definitely the Mötley guys, especially Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee and Mick Mars and Vince was around as well. And it was, they'd be coming in all the time and listening to what we were doing. And if they heard something they didn't like, we'd change it.
You do the Dr. Feelgood album, and then you also did the Mötley Crüe 1994 album. In terms of vibe and in terms of energy, was there a big difference? Were the Crüe guys just the Crüe guys, or was Dr. Feelgood a whole party extravaganza with strippers and going out, and then the other one was more subdued, or were they just sort of the same? Because there's a different singer, there's different times.
Actually, the Mötley Crüe, the Dr. Feelgood album at the time, all of the guys were nobody was drinking. And they weren't doing any drugs and stuff that I saw. Apparently, everybody was on the wagon. I mean, or whatever. And I know Nikki Sixx, I don't think ever did fall off it. But I don't know a lot about the other guys. But I remember going to the Dr. Feelgood concert. It was quite funny. We went backstage. They had Mötley Crüe, the Detox, I can't remember what it was. It was something to the effect that it was the clean room or whatever. So I know they were pretty dedicated to keeping straight and narrow, especially through the production of that album.
And
and
how?
it obviously paid off.
And how was the vibe on the '94 album? Because now you've got, Nirvana's hit. The records are not selling, or at least the quote unquote hair bands. Even though Mötley Crüe's not one, but they were. Was that a different vibe? Was there a sense of desperation? Was there a sense of, oh my God, or was there like, no, this is exciting, we're gonna?
They were very the John Corabi album. They were very excited about that, and it's like, I don't know, it's a lot of people. I've worked on some hugely successful records. And I've worked on some albums that weren't successful at all, but while you're doing them, you're just as into them as the big ones, But you don't, because you never know how things are good. When I was working on the Dr. Feelgood or the Cult album, for instance, I did the Sonic Temple album. That was one of the albums I did with Bob, and I remember I'd never heard of the Cult at that time, and I remember being in there and singing and thought, wow. This is incredible. And then of course the album came out and it was amazing, but you didn't know that these records were going to be big. I mean, who would have known that, like for the Dr. Feelgood album, Kickstart My Heart would have been one of the biggest songs off that album. It's been in about 22 different movies or TV shows. That song is just huge.
Massive song.
But you didn't know that. I mean, I remember I was doing, I think, working on a Jan Arden thing with Bob, last year or whenever it was, and I remember him bringing it up to me saying, "Did you? Well, when we were doing that, the Dr. Feelgood, who would have thought that Kickstart My Heart was going to be? It's a great tune, but who would have thought that was the one that was going to be the humongous killer track? That it turned out to be."
Well, since you mentioned albums that are successful and not successful, I'm going to ask you about Blue Murder. Blue Murder is an album that fans love.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the band wasn't successful for whatever reason. Talk to me about that one. What were some of the expectations going in? You've got Sykes on this. You've got everybody pulling for it. That first album, people love it. What was that session like? Was that one a little bit more difficult because of the personnel involved? And ultimately, why do you think it just didn't take off?
I don't know. Who knows why these things don't work out? But to tell you again, working on that album, it was totally like everybody was into it. And I don't remember having any difficulty, when we were doing the vocals. John was great. Everybody was very cordial. So I don't know, maybe, yeah, sometimes the artists plant stuff, I think, to try to create, drama, so that maybe that helps the album sell better or something. But I don't know. I didn't see any hostility or anything like that during working on that album.
Working with them.
But, no, I didn't.
So let me ask you this. You're also a drummer.
Yes.
Has there been any times where you've been in the studio and they said, hey, listen, we need something punched up. Can you just get behind the kit and do it? Are you primarily just background vocals, or have you done some, post-production drumming or something? Have you done the other part of your skills?
Yes. I played on some couple of Long John Baldry albums. I played on some Straight Line stuff. A band, one of the earliest albums that I did at Little Mountain actually was before the Lover Boys, or it wouldn't be before Lover Boy, but it was a songwriter called Bruce Miller, he's become quite a successful country songwriter. But we did an album, actually did most of the beds and stuff at Little Mountain Sound years ago, so I played drums on that. I'd have to look through it. So there's so many different things I've done. Sometimes it's hard to remember the times. I've actually finally did last year chronologically put together what, all these different projects that I've worked on. So, but in terms of these big albums, you didn't do any fixing or anything like that. No.
So you're not on a Loverboy album. You're not on David Lee Roth's album. You're not.
I'm on. Yeah. I sang on Loverboy albums.
Right, but you didn't play any drums on them.
No, I didn't play drums.
Okay.
No.
All right. So let's get to David Lee Roth. You, of course, were part of A Little Ain't Enough, his
right.
91 album. Talk to me about that, because Dave is not known to be necessarily the best singer, but certainly the best frontman. I mean, you can't compete to the showmanship of David Lee Roth. It's larger than life. What's it like in the studio when it's not that big presentation with the big stage and Eddie Van Halen behind, and he's in the studio in front of a little condenser mic doing his thing? Is he still larger than life?
A lot of the albums, like that I've like the Dr. Feelgood album. Vince didn't do many background vocals on that, but actually, David Lee did come and sing some background parts with us, with Dave and I, and he was quite an interesting character. I mean, he loved the special drum room that they had, the loading bay, which they used for the drums. He had his rock climbing wall in there, so in between takes, he'd be in there, climbing, practicing mountain climbing, which he loves to do. So it was pretty, he's an interesting character for sure.
So he was mountain climbing during the, okay, why not?
Yeah.
But before we get totally caught up in the whole discography discussion, you do have Delinquent Records.
Yeah.
And there is a band, of course, Cease and Desist. Talk to me a little bit about Delinquent Records. What is that? And if I'm a fan out in record world, can I send you a demo, or is it really not about sending demos? What is Delinquent Records, and where can people find it?
It was actually Delinquent Records was, I started when I did a solo album, which unfortunately didn't do it at Little Mountain, but I did do it at Paul Dean, the guitar player from Loverboy's place. He had a beautiful SSL and produced an album for me. So at the time, I decided to start my own label and release that record. It's called the Marc LaFrance record. It didn't get huge success, but it did enable me to start this label and start shopping other bands. I would go to southern France, where there was a big conference called the Midem Conference. So I would take other artists and shop. And back in the day, you could get, deals to release albums in territories like Germany, where you might get $10,000 US advance. It was a whole different planet than it is now, obviously, because the CDs are done. But back then you could get territory deals and actually make money. So I would go and shop different artists. So I shopped a lot of artists and had some good success there for a while doing that. It was interesting for me because it was an avenue to really sort of study the music business side of the industry. And, a lot of artists fear that, but I sort of had a hunger for it and found it very, very enlightening, and it's served me well over the years just because I've done that. And I still do. I produced a band out of Australia with the songwriter Roger Frankham, and a band called Thunderbird, which is kind of a hard-edged record. And so I'm still doing stuff, but more stuff that I'll produce and work with and stuff. But it's still an active label, actually working a deal out right now to get the catalog out there for digital downloads.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you about Thunderbird. So on April 25th, 2018, you released an album called Thunderbirds. Mike Frazier was involved in that?
Exactly.
By the way, all these guys that the Bob Rocks and the Mike Fraziers, I've interviewed them in the past, but man, I'd love a second chance at them. So we'll have to talk about. But talk to me about that. So this came out in 2018. Was that sort of a one and done, or in fact, it was a third album. Are we still actively pursuing Thunderbird as a band, or was the last one in 2018 sort of like the swan song?
I don't know. I think it's, Roger's an interesting character. He lives in Australia and he spends his time actually between Australia and Japan. And I got to do all the vocals on that, and produce it, which was a fun thing. It's just like one of those fun projects that was launched mainly to try to get like the film and television kind of market, because that's a very lucrative market these days. You don't even have to have a huge hit, but if you have a great song, it could fit in a movie, and that's a good way to sometimes launch something. So I wouldn't say that one's done. And I've been chatting with him late. He's coming to Vancouver around Christmas time, so we're going to chat about maybe doing something else. And pretty excited. I just love that, doing these type of projects. It's sometimes you're just doing something. I've always said that to a lot of musicians. Say, you got to do something because you love it, not just because you think it's going to be a big, huge hit or something, because that's the most important thing, that you're enjoying what you're doing. And then everything can fall together after that, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. And I will encourage people to go to YouTube and check out Thunderbird Star, the name of the song. And I'm going to just quote here so that people can understand what we're talking about. From the press release, it says, Thunderbird is blasting through your speakers with riffage of AC/DC level intensity. So listen, here's a guy who's been on records with Mötley Crüe and Blue Murder and Black Veil Brides and all the. So you're not going to get some soft rock here. So go check out Thunderbird. But I do want to ask you this: in the Thunderbird press release, it does talk about how you also worked with Alice Cooper and Bon Jovi. And as I went through your discography, I couldn't find which records of those you had done. So being a huge, totally sold on Bon Jovi, I still don't think they've done anything bad, and fans will critique me nonstop for saying that because I just love them. But what Bon Jovi stuff did you do? Is that like the Born to Be My Baby video where you're all sort of sitting there doing? Talk to me about that.
It was let me see, I'm going to look through here.
It's got to be New Jersey.
It wasn't in New Jersey. It was his big comeback album.
Keep the Faith?
Keep the Faith album, that's right.
Okay.
So I did background vocals on that album along with Dave Steele, and I did that. But see, a lot of the artists back in the day would, like the Mötley Crüe was always very generous about putting your name up there, but some artists prefer to give you just an extra special thanks and give you the proper credit. But that's whatever. You take it worked out, and I'm on that record. So, and the Alice Cooper it's a funny story behind that, because Jim Valance gave me a call one day. He said, "Mark, can you come over and I want you to do some background vocals. I'm working with this guy." I said, "Sure." So I go to his place. I'm working on these background vocals. All of a sudden, this guy comes downstairs at his personal studio, and it was Alice Cooper. So basically, I sat around the afternoon working on demos for an Alice Cooper album. I don't know which one it was, but it was pretty fun thing. But then several years later, another producer out of Phoenix phoned me, and a lot of artists are redoing their masters so they can license to film and television. Well, Alice Cooper was redoing an exact version of Poison, which myself and Dave did the background vocals, which was probably used in some movie or something. But so that would have been it was a remake of Poison on that particular instance. But the other one was a demo session, so it was pretty wonderful. What a gentleman he is. And such a gentleman.
That, by the way, is can I say it this way? It's one of the little dirty secrets in the industry, is that people re-record the songs, and sometimes they put out, like Kiss did a whole re-record thing, and they put out an album of re-records, and the Scorpions did an album of re-records. But sometimes they go into the studio and they do a re-record, and they don't tell anybody. But then you're watching a Hollywood movie and you hear it and you go, that doesn't sound exactly the same. It's because it's not, and that's how they get around the sync rights and the mechanical rights and all these little things. But yeah, and as far as
what happens a lot of times too, though, is that, let's say the company that's a big major that owns the master rights, the deal is too small for them. So they might have a side deal cut with the artist. Okay, well, you can take this one, whatever, that kind of thing. I don't know. But I think that's what happens. There's so many different deals. Oddly, it's funny you just mentioned the Scorpions. I did an album with them as well.
Yes, Face the Heat. And that's what I'm going to finish with, because I got to go get my daughter. And I just want to say one thing on the whole Bon Jovi thing. They've been very, very secretive over the years of who's done what, because we all know that Huey McDonald, and I had a conversation with Richie Sambora on air where we talked about Huey McDonald, so it's not a secret, where he said, you know what, Huey played on our albums, all right, but he's still not credited on Keep the Faith, or on the first one, or on the second one, or on Slippery, or
and you know what, I don't care about that.
Exactly.
It's I know that I worked on it and it was registered properly, at the end of the day, they're not like, it's not like they're not, I don't get my royalties from that stuff. So it's you know, cause I always say, you know, the music industry is smoke and mirrors at the best of times. People say, are you a musician? I say, no, I'm a magician. You know, it's like smoke and mirrors. We're just, you know, it's a show, it's an image.
And fans can't get upset at that. I mean, it's spectacle. I mean, it's a show, and there's an image to portray, and it's just the way it is. But let's finish with yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like also with a lot of people get upset when people use tracks to a certain degree in live shows. They're still playing to those tracks, but if you have, you know, we spend days in the studio making these huge vocal layered sounds, it becomes more like an instrument. The only way you could do that, if you had people, you'd have to have like a choir of 100 people to pull that kind of stuff off. So sometimes it's actually more, people don't realize that actually playing to tracks and using some of those enhanced, unless you're doing lip syncing, which is that's a whole other thing. But most of the guys are really singing. But if you're playing it as a drummer, you know, I've played the tracks, and you have to be really good to do that, because you're stuck with a grid that you have to play with. It's not like you can jam with that track, you know. So it's not as dark as what people think.
No,
anyway,
and the track thing is sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. And I'll just take two examples, right? Yeah. Like, let's take Bon Jovi and Mötley Crüe, who since the 80s, when you hear, you know, the background vocals to whatever, Living on a Prayer, You Give Love a Bad Name, Dr. Feelgood, and you hear that big sound, well, that's being triggered. And now imagine going to that concert and you hear the song and all you hear is the three guys up front. Cause it would sound like shit. So the fan would leave the show going, oh my God, they were so fucking horrible. They suck. So then you give them the enhancement, and then the fan turns around and goes, oh my God, they enhanced it.
Yeah,
so it's like,
you can't win. In this day and age, you can't win for losing, right? You say one thing, somebody, you know, just, you know, social media has got its positives, but certainly everybody's become a critic, and everybody's become a politician or a journalist on social media. So, but anyway,
and I agree with you about the lip syncing being something different. So if the lead singer is doing his thing, and then the drummer or whoever hits that little trigger, you know, the sound guy, and you hear the vocal and the backing vocals, and it adds, I'm in. Or if you go see Peter Criss doing Kiss, and he's doing Beth, and they bring in the violins, and we know it's a tape. It's when the entire show is just a crock of. That's a different thing.
So you got one guy pushes a button, and there's the show, right?
Yeah, and listen, let's not hide it from each other. That does happen. And,
I know,
it's across all boards. It's country artists and heavy metal artists and pop art. If you think it's just a certain genre that's doing it, disabuse yourself of that. It is every single genre. Listen, I went to see a heavy metal show a few years ago, and the drummer was sick, right?
Yeah.
And they played the show with a tape.
Wow.
And I was like,
oh my God.
I was like, wait a minute. Do they not know that we can see that there's no drummer on stage?
That's funny.
What the fuck is this? Now, it was a club show and it was a smaller band and blah, but it was just like, you realize we can see that he's not there, right? You know. Anyway.
Yeah.
On that, Mark, I have to get my daughter at school.
Hey, not a problem. This has been a real pleasure, though.
Yeah, but I got to do a part 2, man. We haven't covered Loverboy. We didn't get to Scorpion's Face the Heat, and we also didn't get to some of these other questions that I have about, you know, going in vocally and doing something for Cher, and then doing something for Black Veil Brides, and doing something for Annihilator. In fact, I'll ask you real quick. That's sort of you have to adapt, right? You don't just go in there with the Mark voice. There's got to be Mark voice.
Right. You got to be, Kim, somebody mentioned, was talking about my session work and they were saying that they call me like a chameleon or something. So I don't know if that sort of fits the term, but you got to be able to, because I've sung on country stuff. I've done tons of children's music with different voices, all, you know, so you just have to, whatever it is thrown at you, you have to react the proper way. And and hopefully you pull it off. And I've had the good fortune of having a lot of different projects, so I feel very fortunate that I've been able to try so many different styles, and I love it. I pinch myself every day that I've been able to do this for my whole life. So
yeah, it's amazing. It really is amazing. On that, as we say in Montreal, merci beaucoup, Monsieur LaFrance. Thank you so much. And hey, listen, I didn't know it, but you gave me a lot of joy over the years by being on these albums.
Well, merci beaucoup. À la prochaine fois.
À la prochaine. Cheers, sir. See you online.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. For more exclusive content and interviews, subscribe on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, and many more. Follow Mitch on all the socials, especially Twitter, @Mitch Lafon, and on Instagram, @Mitch_Lafon. Get your Mitch merch now at loudtracks.com/Mitch.